My thesis was based in Mumbai, outside of Mumbai, called in a place called Thane, whereas Shreya's thesis was based in Chicago. So I'll just give you a brief idea of the presentation itself, what we'll be talking about. So we'll be talking about these two words basically, analytical drawing and atmospheric drawing. And when we looked at each other's work, we were able to find some amount of synergy in it. And the way we were looking at mapping a street. And this is what this presentation is about, that how we can map a street in different forms, one from analytical standpoint and one from atmospheric standpoint, and how combining these two aspects together could give you a richer picture of, of the street. So I'll briefly go into what I'll be talking about, the analytical part, analytical drawing. There are four aspects I focused on when I did my thesis: behavior, temporality, organization, and taxonomy. So what these four factors would be. So I came up with these four factors because streets were incredibly hard to document because of its complexity, and unfolding its complexity was one of the important parts of my thesis as well, and creating a toolkit to document any complex street where eventually after the study one would get a very a tangible evidence to provide solutions to the city or stakeholders or public in general, and also representing it in a fashion where it is easy to convince and build consensus around specific set of ideas. So we were anyways familiar with basic drawing like plan section, elevations, and representing buildings very properly. But when it comes to in between spaces, it was little hard to document. So these four factors sort of try to bridge that gap and create new set of tools and lenses for us to document these in between street scape spaces. So I'll start with behavior. Behavior is fairly easy to understand. I would document street in a way that I would click lots of pictures and create collage for myself so that I could immerse in it. And then the first step for me would be to connect them together to form a cohesive elevation of the street. So this is human scale, human level, but still we see all the layers together. At this point, it looks little complex and confusing. So the next step would be to simplify it in forms of line work, tracing on top of it, which starts giving you a bit of more information what could layers in the street would look like. So first layer in this case would be the static layer, the buildings behind. That's first layer. The second layer would be the shop fronts, the commercial shops which happen on the ground. And these conditions are not only specific to case of Mumbai, but we have seen and we can see these in larger South Asian context. So these would be the static ground floor stores. The next would be the transient, something which moves around as shopkeepers in many parts of our cities. We see lots of shopkeepers moving through the space. So the temporality, that's one of the aspects I try to cover in the thesis. And how these both talk to each other, how these businesses are sort of coordinated on the street. And last but not the least, people, even those are transient and add lots of richness and liveliness to the street. And those are our main subjects as well when we are designing a streetscape and buildings as well. So once I start unfolding it, we can see all the layers together. There are two static layers which are buildings and street markets. There is a dynamic layer which is street furniture, which moves through with the space. There are so many innovative techniques which are used. So documenting those, and I would say creating this collage would give us a backbone to start a study in each of those and go into the detail and understand issues. So in the dynamic, you can see postures. The postures give us also window into the culture of the space, how people sit, interact, talk to each other, their activities. So that's the behavior bit. The second bit would be temporality. Temporality is very interesting phenomenon which happens mostly in lots of informal settings. So in this case, what I'm trying to show is there is a same space, how it is used from early morning to morning to evening to a festival scene. So in the morning, there are daily needs. So there are lots of newspaper stands and milk stands. Then the same space is used for veggies, fruits, eggs. The same space in the evening becomes a full-fledged market for people who are coming back from their offices. And in case of festival, the space completely transforms. All the balconies, all the terraces, they are heavily used in that case, and becomes this big place for participation and people for the processions for people to move through. And these are constructed drawings. These are not exact documentation. So I use lots of time lapse videos for this to document. So I would click lots of pictures at the same time, stay at one place and document the same place through early morning, and try to extrapolate information from it and diagram it so that it's easy to understand and present to the larger audience, and declutter it in a sense so that we can talk about individual elements in case of there is urban renewal discussion happening, or there is a restructuring or redevelopment happening in the similar space. So this was one of the street in outskirts of Mumbai, and everybody will be pretty familiar with this scene where it's like a shared street environment where people are moving through, and there is a street market on the edge. So this would be one of the ways to document temporality, which is slowly getting lots of traction in many of the documentation people are doing for the streets, because this is one of the most important aspects of our streets. Adds lots of richness to the street, uniqueness to the street. So very important for us to document temporality as well. I also made few slide decks or slide collages, I would call it. I treated them as a mechanism for participation, where you would have different layer printed on different acrylic sheets. So if we are in a discussion with a group of people who are maybe part of public or maybe part of the city government, we can actually show the layers and like remove them with our hands and put the new layers in. So also gives them some kind of textural quality and some kind of personalization to it. Everything is not digital at the same time. It has some level of autonomy for the users to do changes. And at the end of the exercise, we will see lots of layers stacked together to imagine the visuals of the street. So this was one of the techniques I tried to implement. In this case, what you are seeing is 4 or 5 layers stacked together. In the background, you will see a layer of festivals as well, which can be removed and put back in as per the time. It also gives you how the place will feel like and look like. So that was temporality. I'll speak about organization. Organization is slightly easier to understand, but considering the complexity of the street, I created a spectrum of activities. So from handheld containers on the left, you have festival infrastructure on the right. So I showed them in this two-parti diagram, where on the top you are seeing the person who is selling something and people who are around it, who are occupying it or using it, utilizing it, enjoying it. Drawing below sort of shows the deep structure of that activity. So there is sometimes a circular logic, sometimes there's a linear logic in how spaces are arranged, and those line diagrams sort of show that. So essentially, I wanted to create a toolkit where the kind of understanding we have about many like clear typologies, like let's say education or residential, we're fairly clear about its organizational attributes, how people move through. So if I give example of a bedroom, so there is a bed, there are furniture pieces around it, and how they work together with the living room and kitchen, we're very clear about that. But in this case, I thought we were not that clear, and there was not much literature available to have that kind of insight into these small street businesses. So I did similar things for these 15 or 20 typologies on the street, which occupy the space between the street and the buildings. So right from the behavior of people to document temporality activities, and now to the businesses themselves and decluttering them and unfolding them. The fourth aspect sort of shows the taxonomy, which is about the buildings. So in this case, you're seeing four disparate conditions. And again, this is not the exact documentation. This is synthesis of all the conditions I observed in the overall region of Mumbai. And I categorize them for simplicity in four parts. You will find lots of corollaries in each one, how gated edges work in detail, or how the enclave or the soft edge works. But in this diagram, I wanted to give a fuller picture of how the larger Mumbai region would feel like if you move through the space from analytical standpoint. And these range from very old buildings from 1960s to contemporary buildings now. So the step up on the left side, you see the second floor retail. That's a fairly new typology we are seeing, where you have a podium and there is a parking attached to it, and there are residential blocks up top, and the temporary retail comes at the street edge. I will show one diagram just for the example. These were one of the streets I documented where the public and private edge was really fluid, smooth, and seamless, where the interior courtyard of the space were heavily utilized, and there was a street edge which was utilized for the markets, and I would call it a soft edge. And I derived my own thesis heavily from these examples. So these kinds of documentations were very helpful for me, and I created this emblematic drawing which shows all of these conditions together, which combines the behavior, temporality, taxonomy, and organization bit, and how we can have this coordinated chaos in a sense that it doesn't affect the street, vehicles, but at the same time having a really lively activity in the in-between spaces, which are thresholds. So those would be my four analytical points. I would give it to Shreya to explain the atmospheric bit.
Hi, my name is Shreya, and I wanted to talk about a different type of drawing, different from what Unmesh just spoke about. I call it atmospheric drawings, and they basically kind of express the feeling or ambience of a space. And I have also categorized it into four parts. The first two parts, which are spatial language and perceivable impressions, they are more driven towards documentation. So it kind of tries to document the current aspects of the street. So how do you feel in that space right now? And the second two, which is the sentiment collage and the idea gesture, they are more driven towards the synthesis or the solution part. So what would the new element that we are putting into the space changes the space, and how does the space then start feeling? A little bit more into detail of each. The first one, which is spatial language. So just to give you all a context, the street that I am talking about is a street in Chicago, which is dominated by South Asian immigrants. What I observed there was there is a spatial language which is created on the street in terms of the signage. So the signage sort of creates a language, and the architecture becomes a backseat. It takes a backseat and becomes a backdrop. The people, the signage, etc., create this language which is inviting, and they are almost competing with each other. So the bigger or the bolder each one is, it tries to bring you inside. And then the second drawing kind of takes you inside. Again, the architectural facade is almost at the backseat, but the interior spaces become a little bit more intriguing. So this diagram kind of shows how the interior spaces feel. So each one has a different activity and a function attached to it. Trying to document that through a different type of drawing was the goal of these drawings. So they can be a gurudwara or a sweet shop or anything inside, which is very different from what the architectural facade is really talking about. It is the architectural facade does not really tell you what is inside, but it's the signage that tells you what is inside and drives you inside. The next type of drawing I want to talk about is perceivable impressions. Essentially, what I'm trying to say through this is things which you don't really, you might not necessarily see, but you might feel. So when you're on this South Asian street, you definitely start smelling these cuisines, a mixture of cuisines. And it's a feeling that you get when you're on the street. So this diagram kind of tried to capture that, how these how a smellscape of sort is created on that street, and also combining it with the religious activities. You can sense that there is a diverse set of people on the street who are following different religious religions, and they have like different places of worship distributed on that street. So it kind of gives you that feeling that you are in a very diverse neighborhood. And again, the signage kind of becomes this spotlight. It's driving you inside. So this diagram was almost like an attempt at capturing these different feelings that entice your senses. Like they kind of touch different senses, like smell, sight, things like that. The next type is a sentiment collage. So sentiment collage and idea gesture, like I was talking about, are driven a little bit more towards the solution. In this case, my idea was to introduce 4 new types of immigrants onto the street. And the idea was that I tried to allocate one characteristic or identity to each of these 4 new immigrants. So the first one, which was called the encroaching immigrant, had this identity of taking over another space. The other one, which is seen in yellow, was the bridging immigrant, which tried to bridge 2 spaces together. Third one was a suspended immigrant, which was kind of suspended in between a space. And the fourth one was a floating immigrant, which kind of culminated as a floating pavilion. So the idea behind the sentiment collage is to put forward the core sentiment behind your solution. And then the next type, which is the idea gesture. The idea gesture is about that one gesture that you're trying to put forward, which talks about the idea. So in case of the floating immigrant, the idea was to create a floating water pavilion, which is a festive pavilion, which can be used for different festivals. So on the left-hand side, you can see how it is used during Holi, versus on the right-hand side, you're seeing how it is used during Hanukkah or Christmas. So this idea or the gesture of using it for different festivals was the idea gesture in this case. And there's another example on the next slide, which wherein this outdoor space is an extension of a restaurant, and the gesture was in these 6 large openings which try to invite you outside. And then the other functional aspect of it was how it changes from day to night, wherein during the day it is used as a dance pavilion, whereas during the night it becomes a theater space.
So as you saw, we spoke about these 2 kinds of drawings, the analytical and atmospheric. One will understand that these are in different directions. So when we looked at each other's drawings, we saw there is an opportunity for collaborations in terms of competitions, where we have the analytical point as the backbones of the design, and use atmospheric drawings to create consensus with larger public or people who are living there, and create a dialogue through our drawings. So for the collaboration, we worked on recently on one competition based in Dallas, Texas. It's a place called Deep Ellum. It's a place known for its history, rich culture, music, jazz, blues. And right now there is a place in the neighborhood which is vacant, abandoned, and that the task was to redevelop it in a way to respect the culture of the space. And we try to utilize our findings from our theses in this project. And as you can see in this diagram, we had this big swath of land, and we have a big park in the center. We try to create network of parks so that people could move freely. It's safer. There are lots of eyes on the street. And we also ensured the buildings are not out of scale. So extruding them to the human scale as per the current logic in the deep LM, splitting them or offsetting them to create these manageable scales for people to move through, and having a superstructure on top, which is breaking the scale and not having these long facades, but breaking the block frequently to create walkable environment. And this shows how the space would feel like. We also made this diagram. On the top you can see, on the right you can see there are 4 major user groups. We studied their behavior based on their activities and their user profiles. So communitarian, optimizer, maker, and explorers would be 4 typologies of users in that area. And how we can create this cyclical urbanism using those user groups and the buildings we are designing, where the resources created in the urban farm will be utilized for the restaurants, markets, and again the profits or the yield which comes out of it is reinvested in the community, for people in the marginalized communities, where they can utilize it as a subsidy, and it's a sustainable path for home ownership. And this sort of creates this cyclical urbanism, as I spoke about, not only in terms of ecological aspect, but also in terms of economic aspect. And we try to show that in our atmospheric drawings as well, as you are seeing those 2 drawings.
And going a little bit more into detail as to how these atmospheric drawings were created, like I had previously discussed, the sentiment collage that was created for this as well. So this was the sentiment collage that was created for this project, from which inspired essentially the color palette, the materiality, and aspects which were really essential for the community. So we tried to take these few elements, collaged it in one place. So you can see these murals that are dominant in those streets, and sculptural elements which are present on the street. And then you can see this lamppost with an artist work on it, which was like an initiative taken by the city to incorporate more works by artists on this street. So using this as our backbone, we tried to create these atmospheric drawings. So if you go to the next slide, from this model, we started layering it with the elements that we had collected, and also incorporating our own design onto it. So for example, we tried to create this mural street almost, which becomes this wayfinding street almost, or a completely public street with limited vehicular access, along with the brick facade, which was very dominant in the street, but adding it with our own version or our own style and colors that we felt were necessary for the street. And then finally adding elements like that same lamppost with the art piece on it, so that when during a stakeholder meeting or during a community design activity, when you're with the community, they can instantly see such elements and try to picture themselves on this street. So they essentially see their future of the street by being immersed in this experience. So that was essentially our idea behind this.